The hook, the bulldozers arrived at dawn, tearing through Sarah's grandmother's rose garden like it was nothing. By noon, a gleaming HOA office sat where her family's heritage had bloomed for 60 years. But when the sun set that evening, something impossible happened. The building simply ... vanished. No trace. No rubble, just empty ground and the faint scent of roses in the air. The HOA president's face went white as paper when he saw it. He had no idea what Sarah Chen was truly capable of, or that some land holds secrets far older and more powerful than any legal document. Part 1. Sarah Chen's hands trembled as she held the certified letter, the words blurring through her tears. Notice of eminent domain proceedings. The Willowbrook Homeowners Association had somehow convinced the county that her grandmother's Tucker plot was needed for community improvements. This can't be legal, she whispered to the empty kitchen, where Nine-Eye had taught her to make dumplings every Sunday for 23 years. The letter was dated 3 weeks ago. She'd been traveling for work, consulting on sustainable architecture projects across the Pacific Northwest. Her mailbox had overflowed, and this bombshell had been buried beneath catalogs and bills. Construction began tomorrow. Sarah's phone buzzed. Marcus Rivera, her childhood friend and now a successful lawyer in Portland, had been trying to reach her since she'd left him a frantic voicemail an hour ago. Double quotes, Sarah, I got your message. I'm driving down from Portland right now. His voice was tight with concern. Don't do anything rash. We can fight this. Fight it with what, Marcus? They have county approval. Look outside my window. Through the kitchen curtains, she could see the orange surveyor flags dotting her grandmother's meticulously maintained garden. The rosebushes that had won county fair ribbons for 3 decades stood like condemned prisoners awaiting execution. There has to be something irregular about the process. Eminent domain requires proper notification, fair compensation. They're offering $60,000 for 2 acres in a neighborhood where empty lots sell for twice that. And the notification? Sarah's voice cracked. Apparently they sent it to my grandmother's name. She's been dead for 2 years. Marcus. A long silence. Then, that's fraudulent service. We can get an injunction. The hearing was last week. I missed it because I didn't know about it. Sarah sank into her grandmother's rocking chair, the wood creaking with familiar comfort. They knew exactly what they were doing. The doorbell rang, sharp and demanding. Through the frosted glass, Sarah could see a broad silhouette in an expensive suit. I have to go. Someone's here. She opened the door to find Richard Blackwood, president of the Willowbrook HOA, flanked by 2 men in hard hats and clipboards. Blackwood was everything Sarah despised about gentrification, artificially tanned, with the kind of practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Miss Chen, I presume. I'm Richard Blackwood. I believe you received our correspondence regarding the property acquisition. You mean the theft of my family's land? Blackwood's smile didn't waver. Now, that's unnecessarily dramatic. This is a legal proceeding for the greater good of the community. We're building a new HOA administration building that will serve all residents of Willowbrook, all residents except the one you're displacing. You're receiving fair market compensation. $60,000 for 2 acres? My grandmother bought this land in 1962 for $8,000. Do you think I'm stupid? One of the hard hats shifted uncomfortably, but Blackwood remained smooth as silk. Property values are complex, Miss Chen. The land requires significant environmental remediation before construction can begin. Frankly, we're being generous. Sarah felt heat rise in her chest, that familiar sensation she'd learned to suppress since childhood. Her grandmother had warned her about letting emotions run too hot, especially on this land. Environmental remediation for what? Old septic systems, potential soil contamination. These older properties often have hidden issues. Blackwood gestured dismissively at the gardens that had never used a single chemical fertilizer. We'll need you out by tomorrow morning so we can begin the assessment. Tomorrow? I just got the notice today. The legal process has been ongoing for weeks. Your failure to respond doesn't stop progress. Blackwood's mask was slipping, revealing something harder underneath. The moving truck will be here at 8 a.m. I suggest you have your belongings packed. The heat in Sarah's chest was spreading, making her fingertips tingle. A wind chime on the porch began to sing despite the still air. Blackwood's eyes narrowed, sensing something off but not understanding what. Mr. Blackwood, Sarah said quietly, my grandmother's people have been on this land for over a century. Before the subdivision, before your HOA, before this whole neighborhood existed. Some things run deeper than your paperwork. Miss Chen, I don't know what kind of mystical nonsense you're implying, but this is a legal matter. Sentiment doesn't supersede law. The wind chime's song grew louder, more insistent. The temperature around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. Blackwood's companion stepped back involuntarily. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Sarah said, her voice carrying an authority that made Blackwood's practiced confidence falter. But you will. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Sarah stepped back inside, her hand on the door. You want this land so badly. Take it. But remember, some things that are taken must eventually be returned. She closed the door on his sputtering protests. her heart hammering. Through the window, she watched the three men retreat to their black Mercedes, Blackwood gesturing angrily at his clipboard companions. Sarah's phone rang. Marcus again. I've been researching the HOA filing, he said without preamble. Something's weird about this whole thing. The administration building they're planning? It's massive. Way bigger than any HOA would need for a subdivision this size. What do you mean? I mean they're planning a 12,000 square foot building with commercial grade utilities and parking for 50 cars. Sarah, your neighborhood only has 30 houses total? Why would they need? They're not building an HOA office, Sarah realized. Pieces clicking together. They're building something they can sell, something they can profit from. Exactly. And if we can prove the eminent domain claim was fraudulent, that they misrepresented the intended use, we can not only stop the construction but sue them for fraud. Sarah walked to her grandmother's bedroom, where faded photographs covered every surface. Nine-Eye is a young woman, in traditional dress, standing beside a much younger version of the same oak tree that now dominated the backyard. Her great-grandmother, posing with herbs and flowers that still grew wild at the property's edge. Marcus, how long would that take? Months, maybe a year if they fight it. But Sarah, you could win. Not just stop them, but take them for everything. They're worth, I don't have months. She picked up a photograph of 5 generations of women standing in the same spot. The land stretching behind them unmarked by suburban development. They start construction tomorrow. Then we get an emergency. Injunction? No. Sarah's voice carried a strange calm. There's another way. Sarah, whatever you're thinking. Marcus, do you remember when we were kids? The stories my grandmother used to tell about the land? A pause. You mean the folk tales? Sarah, you're scaring me, she used to say. The land chose its own guardians, that it would protect itself if it had to. Sarah set down the photograph, her decision crystallizing. I thought they were just stories. They were just stories. Were they? Sarah walked to her grandmother's dresser, pulling out a wooden box she hadn't opened since the funeral. Inside, wrapped in silk, lay items that most people would dismiss as primitive superstitions. Remember the drought of '98? How our garden was the only one in the neighborhood that stayed green. Coincidence? Remember when they tried to put that cell tower on the hill? How the construction equipment kept breaking down until they gave up. Mechanical failures happen. Remember when Tommy Breslin was bullying me in 8th grade, and he broke his arm the day after he pushed me into the creek? Silence on the other end. Sarah lifted out a small jade pendant, carved with symbols her great-grandmother had brought from Guangzhou. As her fingers closed around it, she felt the familiar warmth, the sense of connection that ran deeper than blood. Sarah, don't do anything you'll regret. The only thing I regret is not listening to Nine-Eye sooner. She walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the surveyor flags. Some battles are fought in courtrooms, Marcus. Others are fought on different ground entirely. I'm 20 minutes away. Just wait for me. Sarah hung up and turned off her phone. She walked outside, barefoot, feeling the cool earth between her toes. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. She knelt in the center of her grandmother's rose garden, the jade pendant warm against her palm. The wind chimes sang louder, now joined by sounds that couldn't quite be identified, whispers in languages older than English, rustling in trees that shouldn't move in still air. Nine-Eye, she whispered, I need your help. They want to take what's ours. Show me what to do. The response came not in words but in knowledge that flowed through her like water through dry earth. She understood now why her grandmother had been so insistent about the old ways, the old stories, why certain rituals had been maintained, even as He stood at the edge of Sarah Chen's property, coffee steaming in the crisp morning air, watching his construction crew unload equipment from 3 massive trucks. The bulldozer's engine rumbled to life, diesel fumes mixing with the scent of roses that seemed impossibly strong for October. Beautiful morning for demolition, he said to his foreman, Jake Martinez, a weathered man with 30 years of construction experience. Let's get this eyesore cleared by noon. Jake frowned, kneeling, to place his palm against the earth. Boss, you feel that? Feel what? The ground. It's vibrating. Blackwood crouched beside him, pressing his manicured hand to the soil. There was something, a barely perceptible tremor, like a cat's purr transmitted through miles of earth. Probably the machinery, Blackwood dismissed, though the bulldozer was 50 feet away. Let's get started. I have the county inspector coming at 10, and I want him to see significant progress. Sarah watched from her kitchen window as the crew spread out across her grandmother's garden. She hadn't slept, spending the night in communion with forces that most people had forgotten ever existed. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman transformed, still recognizably herself, but with an otherworldly composure that made her seem carved from stone. The jade pendant lay warm against her throat, invisible beneath her sweater but pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Or perhaps her heartbeat had synchronized with something deeper. Ready when you are, boss, the bulldozer operator called out, positioning his machine in front of the first rose bush, a 60-year-old specimen that had won blue ribbons at every county fair since 1985. Blackwood raised his hand, savoring the moment. This Chen woman had defied him yesterday, speaking in riddles about sacred ground and ancient claims. Today she would learn that progress waited for no one's mystical delusions. "Bring it down," he commanded. The bulldozer lurched forward, its blade aimed at the heart of the garden, and stopped. Not gradually. The machine simply ceased all forward motion, as if it had struck an invisible wall. The engine roared, tracks spinning, diesel smoke belching black against the morning sky. But the bulldozer remained motionless, its blade inches from the first rosebush. What the hell? The operator revved the engine harder, the sound echoing off nearby houses and bringing neighbors to their windows. "It won't move forward." Jake jogged over, circling the machine with growing bewilderment. "Try reverse." The bulldozer shot backward so fast the operator nearly lost control, stopping only when he killed the engine entirely. "The transmission's fine," Jake reported after a quick inspection. "Everything's working perfectly." "Then why won't it push forward?" Blackwood's carefully maintained composure was beginning to crack. "I don't know, boss. It's like there's something blocking it, but there's nothing there." Blackwood stalked to the rosebush, grabbing its thorny stem with his bare hands. Pain shot through his palms as thorns punctured skin, but he held on, trying to shake the plant loose from its roots. The rosebush didn't budge, not even a leaf trembled. "Get the chainsaw," he barked, blood dripping from his wounded hands. The bulldozer won't work. We'll cut them down manually." The chainsaw started on the first pull, its angry whine splitting the morning air. The operator, a lean man named Danny, who'd been clearing lots for 15 years apart. The same rosebush with professional confidence. The chainsaw died the moment its blade touched. Bark. Danny pulled the starter cord. Nothing, he checked. The fuel, the spark plug, the air filter. Everything was perfect, but the machine refused to start. "This is impossible," he muttered, carrying the saw to his truck. He returned with a backup, a newer model he'd bought just last month. It started immediately, roaring with mechanical hunger, and died again the instant it touched the rosebush. "What kind of game is this?" Blackwood spun toward Sarah's house, his face flushed with rage, and something that might have been fear. "Chen, get out here." Sarah emerged from her front door with the unhurried grace of someone who knew exactly what was happening. She wore simple jeans and a white sweater, but something about her presence made the construction workers step back involuntarily. "Problem with your equipment, Mr. Blackwood? You did something to sabotage our machinery." "Did I?" Sarah walked closer, her bare feet silent on the grass. "When would I have had access to your bulldozer? Your chainsaws? I've been inside all morning." Jake was testing the chainsaw on a piece of scrap wood. It cut through pine effortlessly, the engine purring with perfect performance. But when he approached any of the garden plants, the motor died as if someone had thrown a switch. "This is some kind of electronic interference," Blackwood said, though his voice lacked conviction. "You're using some device to disrupt our equipment. What device would that be?" Sarah's tone was mild, almost amused. "Feel free to search my property. Check for any technology that could cause what you're experiencing." Blackwood gestured frantically to his crew. "Spread out, find whatever she's using to sabotage us." The men reluctantly began searching the garden, looking under bushes and around trees for hidden electronics. They found nothing but flowers, herbs, and the occasional garden gnome. Meanwhile, the morning sun climbed higher, and with it came more neighbors. Word was spreading through the subdivision that something strange was happening at the old Chen place. People gathered on sidewalks and driveways, watching the bizarre spectacle of construction equipment defeated by rose bushes. "Try hand tools," Blackwood ordered, his desperation growing. "Shovels, axes, anything without an engine." Danny selected a heavy-duty shovel and approached the nearest plant, a cluster of lavender that Sarah's grandmother had planted to attract butterflies. He raised the shovel high and brought it down with all his strength. The impact rang out like metal striking stone. The shovel blade rebounded so hard it nearly broke Danny's wrists, and when he examined the tool, he found the steel edge had been chipped as if he'd tried to dig through granite. The lavender plants were untouched, not even bent by the blow. "Jesus," Danny whispered, crossing himself. "What is this stuff made of?" Other workers tried different approaches. Axes bounced off flower stems like they were made of steel. Pruning shears closed on delicate petals only to spring open again, their blades unable to cut through tissue that should have been softer than paper. The gathering crowd of neighbors was murmuring now, phones appearing to record the impossible scene. Blackwood could see his reputation built on 30 years of successful development projects crumbling in real time. "There has to be an explanation," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Some kind of chemical treatment, maybe. Industrial, hardening compound." Sarah laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Mr. Blackwood, do you really think my grandmother was coating her roses with industrial chemicals? The woman who refused to use anything stronger than compost tea?" A new voice cut through the confusion. "What the hell is going on here?" Marcus Rivera pushed through the crowd, his lawyer's suit rumpled from the drive down from Portland. He'd been calling Sarah all night, growing more worried with each unanswered ring. "Marcus," Sarah greeted him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Perfect timing. Mr. Blackwood was just discovering that some things can't be bulldozed." Marcus looked from the frustrated construction crew to the unmarked garden to Sarah's eerily calm demeanor. Sarah, what did you do? Before she could answer, Jake called out from near the property line. Boss, you need to see this. He was kneeling where the surveyor flags had been planted the day before. In their place, new growth had appeared overnight. Seedlings, but fully mature plants that looked like they'd been growing for decades. Ancient oaks twisted up from soil that had been empty 12 hours earlier. Bamboo groves created impenetrable barriers along the property boundaries. Thorn bushes thick as a man's arm formed natural walls that would challenge a machete, let alone construction equipment. This is impossible, Blackwood breathed. Plants don't grow like this. Not overnight, don't they? Sarah walked to one of the impossible oaks, placing her palm against its bark. The tree seemed to lean into her touch, leaves rustling without wind. Maybe you just haven't been paying attention to what's possible. Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her aside. Sarah, I need to know what's happening here. As your lawyer and your friend, I need the truth. She looked at him for a long moment, seeing the fear and confusion in his eyes. He'd been her anchor to the rational world for so long. The friend, who'd helped her navigate college applications and job interviews and all the ordinary challenges of modern life. How could she explain that rationality was just one small corner of a much larger reality? The truth is that some things are more important than property law, she said finally. Some claims run deeper than deeds and surveys. That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters. Behind them, Blackwood was on his phone, his voice rising with each failed attempt to explain the situation to his superiors. The county inspector had arrived and was walking through the garden with the expression of a man whose understanding of the world was being systematically dismantled. Sir, the inspector said to Blackwood, I need to ask what exactly did you do to these plants, because if you've used some kind of experimental hardening agent without PM. Sarah watched from her living room window as reporter Amanda Hayes adjusted her blazer and checked her microphone, preparing to broadcast the story that would change everything. Behind her, the impossible garden glowed in the golden hour light. Oaks that had grown overnight, thorn bushes thick as castle walls, roses that turned steel tools to scrap metal. This is Amanda Hayes reporting from Willowbrook subdivision, where what can only be described as a botanical miracle has brought construction to a complete standstill. Sarah's phone buzzed incessantly. Text messages from college friends who'd seen social media posts, voicemails from reporters, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. The video of construction equipment being defeated by flower petals had gone viral, spawning theories that ranged from scientific to supernatural to completely absurd. But it was the black sedan parked across the street that worried her most. It had arrived an hour ago, and the two men inside hadn't moved since. They wore identical dark suits and had the kind of stillness that spoke of professional training. Government agents, she was certain. Which branch? She couldn't guess, but their interest was unmistakable. Marcus sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents and looking like a man whose worldview had been fed through a paper shredder. He'd spent the day trying to find rational explanations for what he'd witnessed, researching everything from growth hormones to genetic modification to elaborate magic tricks. Sarah, you have to talk to me, he said without looking up from his laptop. The county inspector took soil samples. They're going to test everything: the plants, the dirt, even the air around the garden. When those tests come back, what will they show? Sarah poured herself tea from her grandmother's ceramic pot, the one painted with dragons and phoenixes that had survived 3 generations of careful handling. I don't know, that's what scares me. Marcus finally met her eyes, because either they'll find some scientific explanation that makes all this make sense, or they won't. And if they don't, then what? Then you become the most interesting person in the world to some very dangerous people. As if summoned by his words, the doorbell rang. Sarah felt the jade pendant grow warm against her throat, a warning she'd learned to heed. Through the frosted glass, she could see 2 tall figures in those ubiquitous dark suits. Don't answer it, Marcus whispered, but Sarah was already walking to the door. Running wouldn't solve anything, and she sensed that these men would find their way inside regardless of her cooperation. She opened the door to find 2 agents who could have been stamped from the same mold, mid-40s, forgettably handsome, with eyes that revealed nothing. Miss Chen, I'm Agent Morrison, FBI. This is Agent Park. We'd like to speak with you about the unusual events that occurred here today. FBI. Sarah stepped aside to let them enter, noting how they positioned themselves to observe both her and Marcus simultaneously. This seems like a matter for agricultural inspectors, not federal agents. Agent Park smiled, a cold expression that never touched his eyes. Miss Chen, when construction equipment worth $500,000 is rendered inoperative by what but appears to be supernatural intervention, it becomes a matter of national security. Supernatural? Sarah settled into her grandmother's rocking chair, projecting calm while her mind raced. That's an interesting word choice for a federal agent. We prefer to keep an open mind, Morrison said, pulling out a tablet and stylus. Tell me, Miss Chen, what's your educational background? MIT, dual degree in architecture and environmental engineering. Why? Any study of botany, chemistry, materials, science. Some it's hard to design sustainable buildings without understanding how natural systems work. Agent Park wandered toward the kitchen, ostensibly casual but clearly cataloging everything he saw. And your work, you're a consultant. I help architects and engineers design buildings that work with natural systems instead of against them. Green roofs, living walls, biomimetic structures. Sarah kept her voice level, professional. Nothing that would explain what happened in my garden? Ah, but that's where you're wrong, Morrison said, stylus poised over his tablet. You see, we've been researching you since this morning. Very impressive resume. Projects in 12 countries. Several patents related to plant-integrated architecture. And some very interesting research into indigenous building practices. Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. They'd done their homework too quickly for a routine investigation. Indigenous practices, Park echoed from the kitchen, examining the photographs on her grandmother's walls. Your grandmother was Chinese, but these pictures, some of these techniques look much older. Pre-colonial. My great-grandmother learned from the local tribes when she first came to America, Sarah said carefully. Many indigenous peoples had sophisticated understanding of plant genetics. Plant genetics. Morrison made a note. Is that what this is? Some kind of advanced genetic modification? Marcus leaned forward, his lawyer instincts finally kicking in. Gentlemen, my client doesn't have to answer your questions without representation. Present. Actually, Mr. Rivera, she does. Park returned from his kitchen reconnaissance, settling into a chair that gave him clear sight lines to both exits. Under the National Defense Authorization Act, phenomena that potentially threaten critical infrastructure fall under federal jurisdiction. Critical infrastructure, Marcus's voice rose. We're talking about a garden dispute, are we? Morrison pulled up something on his tablet, turning it to show Sarah a satellite image of her property. This photograph was taken at 6 p.m. today. Note the thermal signature. Sarah's blood chilled. The image showed her garden glowing like a furnace. Heat patterns radiating outward in complex geometric designs that resembled circuit boards more than random plant growth. The surface temperature of your garden is currently 87 degrees Fahrenheit, Morrison continued. The ambient air temperature is 52 degrees. Your plants are generating heat, Miss Chen, lots of it. And that energy is flowing in patterns that suggest some form of organized network. Networks, Park added, that our experts believe could potentially interface with electronic systems. Imagine what someone could do if they could control plant growth to disrupt power grids. Telecommunications, transportation systems, ... That's ridiculous, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was remembering her grandmother's stories about the old country, about plants that could carry messages across vast distances, about root systems that connected forests in ways scientists were only beginning to understand. Is it? Morrison leaned forward. Miss Chen, we know you didn't use any conventional technology today. No electronic devices, no chemical treatments, no mechanical sabotage. Our instruments detected no electromagnetic interference, no unusual radiation, no exotic particles, and yet you somehow turned ordinary garden plants into materials that can stop industrial equipment. The jade pendant was growing hot now, almost burning against her skin. Sarah could feel something building in the room, not just tension, but actual energy. The houseplants lining her windows were turning toward her like flowers following the sun. So we're left with two possibilities, Park said. Either you've discovered some revolutionary new technology that violates several laws of physics, in which case you represent a major security asset that needs to be protected and studied, or ... or what? Morrison closed his tablet with a soft click, or you're doing something that science can't currently explain, which would make you either extremely dangerous or extremely valuable, possibly both. Marcus stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. This conversation is over. Sarah, don't say another word. But Sarah was no longer listening to Marcus. She was listening to something else, a whisper of wind through leaves. The creak of branches, the subtle percussion of root systems expanding through soil. The network Agent Morrison had detected wasn't just in her garden. It was everywhere, spreading through the subdivision like veins through living tissue, connecting her property to every tree, every shrub, every blade of grass in a radius that was growing larger by the hour. You're right about one thing, she said quietly. I am dangerous. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. Frost began forming on the windows despite the mild October evening. The houseplants grew visibly larger, their leaves darkening to deep emerald, their stems thickening with predatory grace. Agent Morrison reached for his weapon, but his hand froze halfway to his holster. Vines were emerging from the potted plants, moving with deliberate intelligence, wrapping around his wrist with gentle but implacable strength. Miss Chen, Park said carefully, we're not here to hurt you. We just want to understand. No. Sarah stood, and as she did, the jade pendant became visible through her sweater, glowing with soft green light. You want to control? To weaponize. To turn something sacred into another tool for power. More vines appeared, emerging from cracks in the floorboards, gaps around windows, the soil of every potted plant. They moved like curious cats, investigating the agents without threatening them yet. The land chose me as its guardian, Sarah continued, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate from the walls themselves. Not because I'm special, but because I listen. Because I understand that some things. He awoke to his phone buzzing with emergency alerts from across his development portfolio. The Willowbrook project wasn't an isolated incident, it was patient zero in a plague of impossible, botanical warfare that had spread to every property his company had acquired through questionable means. Sir, you need to see this. His assistant's voice was tight with panic when he answered. The Riverside Commons, site the one where we relocated those migrant families last year. The construction equipment is ... stuck. Blackwood threw on clothes and drove through the pre-dawn darkness to what should have been a cleared lot ready for luxury condominiums. Instead, he found his night security guard cowering in his truck, while massive oak trees emerged from concrete, like ancient gods reclaiming their territory. Trees that hadn't existed when the guard started his shift 6 hours earlier. They just grew out of nowhere. Mr. Blackwood, the guard stammered. Started around midnight? Roots cracked the foundation slabs like they were made of paper. The trees are so big now, they're pushing the construction trailers around like toys. Similar reports flooded in throughout the morning. The shopping center, built on a demolished community garden now overgrown with fruit trees that bore impossible harvests in October. The parking garage constructed over a filled wetland its basement. Levels flooded as underground springs mysteriously reappeared, carrying water so pure it seemed to glow. Every site where Blackwood development had displaced families, destroyed habitats, or bulldozed through environmental protections, was experiencing the same phenomenon. Plants were reclaiming stolen ground with supernatural speed and strength, undoing years of development in single nights. But the Chen property remained the epicenter, the green heart from which this verdant revolution pulsed outward. Sarah stood in her grandmother's garden at sunrise, feeling the network of roots and consciousness that now connected every recovered site. She was no longer entirely human, or perhaps she was finally fully human in a way that modern people had forgotten. The jade pendant had merged with her skin, becoming a green star pulsing above her heart, its light visible through any clothing she wore. The FBI came back last night, Marcus reported, joining her among the impossible roses. He'd aged years in the past week, his hair showing silver that hadn't been there before. They're setting up a perimeter 2 blocks out. Military vehicles, scientists, something called a Botanical anomaly response team. Let them come, Sarah said, her voice carrying harmonics that made flower petals tremble. They can't fight the earth itself. Sarah, they have flamethrowers, chemical defoliants. They're talking about napalm. She turned to look at him, and Marcus saw that her eyes now held flecks of gold and green that moved like light through leaves. Marcus, do you think my grandmother's roses have survived 60 years of droughts, floods, and suburban development by being fragile? As if summoned by her words, the roses began to bloom. Not the gradual unfurling of normal flowers, but an explosive burst of color and scent that filled the air with perfume so intense it was almost visible. The blooms were larger than any natural rose, their petals seeming to glow with inner light, their thorns sharp as surgical steel. Besides, Sarah continued, they're not just fighting plants anymore. She gestured toward the street, where neighbors were gathering. But these weren't the frightened suburbanites who'd watched the first day's construction disaster. These were people transformed as bright with purpose, movements synchronized in ways that suggested deeper connections than mere conversation. Mrs. Patterson, from 3 houses down, carried a bouquet of flowers that pulsed with the same green light as Sarah's pendant. The Hendersons' twin boys, normally glued to their gaming systems, tended a garden that had appeared overnight in their front yard, their small hands coaxing impossible growth from ordinary soil. They're connected now, Sarah explained. Everyone who was willing to listen. The network isn't just underground anymore, it's growing through the community itself. A black helicopter circled overhead, its cameras recording everything. Military trucks were visible at the ends of each street, setting up barriers that looked substantial but would prove meaningless against what was coming. Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm, his lawyer's mind still trying to find rational solutions to an irrational situation. Sarah, they're going to declare martial law. They'll evacuate the neighborhood, then burn everything. You can't fight the entire federal government, can't I? Sarah smiled, and in that expression Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. It wasn't cruelty, it was the serene confidence of someone who held cards that no one else could even imagine. Marcus, do you know what percentage of the world's oxygen comes from plants? What percentage of the global food supply depends on pollination? How many critical ecosystems exist on land that corporations want to develop? She walked to the ancient oak that had grown overnight at her property line, placing her palm against its bark. Immediately, its leaves began to rustle with a sound like whispered conversations. I'm not fighting the government, Marcus. I'm reminding the entire planet what it means to fight back. The oak's whispers grew louder, joined by similar sounds, from every tree in the subdivision, then from every tree in the city. The network Sarah had awakened wasn't limited to her grandmother's land. It was spreading through root systems and airborne spores, through the underground fungal networks that connected forests across continents. In Washington, D.C., the cherry trees around the Capitol building began to bloom out of season, their roots cracking sidewalks and disrupting underground cables. In California, vineyards that had been clear-cut for housing developments sprouted new growth that overwhelmed construction equipment. In the Amazon, logging operations ground to a halt as trees grew faster than they could be cut. They were becoming harder than steel the moment chainsaws touched bark. Richard Blackwood watched his corporate empire dissolve in real time through news feeds and panicked phone calls. Every questionable land deal, every environmental shortcut, every community displaced for profit, all of it was being undone by forces that made his lawyers and lobbyists irrelevant. But it was the personal call that destroyed him completely. Richard, the voice belonged to his ex-wife, Alina, calling from their daughter's college campus. "Sophie's here with me, and got Richard, you need to see this." The video she sent showed their 19-year-old daughter standing in the center of the university quad, her hands pressed against the trunk of an enormous redwood that definitely hadn't been there that morning. Sophie's eyes held the same green-gold flecks that Sarah's did, and when she smiled at the camera, her teeth seemed to have roots. "Hi, Dad," Sophie said, her voice carrying impossible harmonics. "I just wanted you to know, I remember what you did to get my tuition money, the families you evicted, the wetlands you filled, the forests you cut." Her smile never wavered, but the tree behind her grew another 20 feet as she spoke. "And I forgive you. We all do. But that doesn't mean we're going to let it continue." The call ended, leaving Blackwood staring at a blank screen while his world collapsed around him. At the Chen property, federal agents were discovering that their sophisticated equipment was useless against an enemy that existed in dimensions their science hadn't mapped. Radiation detectors showed normal readings. Chemical sensors found nothing but ordinary plant matter. Thermal imaging revealed heat signatures that followed no known pattern of biological activity. Agent Morrison stood at the perimeter, watching through binoculars as Sarah Chen moved through her impossible garden like a queen among her subjects. Every attempt to establish communication had been met with polite refusal. Every threat had been answered with demonstrations of power that made those threats seem quaint. "Sir," Agent Park approached with a tablet full of satellite imagery, "you need to see this." The images showed the continental United States from orbit, but instead of the familiar patchwork of cities and farmland, vast green networks were visible, pulsing lines of vegetation that connected forests, parks, and gardens in a continental web of living communication. "It's not just spreading randomly," Park explained. "It's following specific patterns, connecting preserved lands, indigenous territories, old-growth forests, like it's rebuilding something that was broken." Morrison lowered his binoculars, finally understanding the scope of what they were facing. "It's not a weapon, it's a restoration. Sir, the Chen woman isn't trying to destroy civilization. She's trying to save the planet from civilization." As if responding to his recognition, the jade pendant around Sarah's throat pulsed with brilliant green light, visible even through the government-issued field glasses. The roses in her garden began to sing, not metaphorically, but with actual harmonics that carried across the neighborhood like a gentle choir. Other voices joined them, trees throughout the subdivision, then the city, then spreading outward in waves that spanned continents. The song of growing things reclaiming their birthright, of roots remembering their connections, of an ancient intelligence awakening after centuries of slumber. Richard Blackwood heard that song from his office window and felt something break. Inside his chest, not his heart, but his certainty. For the first time in 30 years of ruthless development, he understood.